Just as a reminder, you can visit us at thepandapod.com. That's thepandapod.com to grab our RSS feed, listen directly, and share PandaPod with your family and friends. You can also reach us directly via email through podcast at thepandapod.com. Thanks for listening.
Ever felt like you're wandering through a world that doesn't quite fit? Like you're a square peg being nudged into a round hole? Maybe you've caught yourself gazing up at the stars, pondering the mysteries that seem to slip through the fingers of conventional wisdom. Do esoteric beliefs resonate with you more than everyday chatter? Is there a voice inside you whispering that there's infinitely more to this universe than what meets our 3D eyes? If any of this sounds familiar, if any of these questions stir something deep within you, then you might just be the alien we're looking for. This isn't about being from another planet. It's about feeling like you're out of place in this one. It's about believing in the extraordinary, the spaces between. So tell us, do you feel that call, that pull towards something, somewhere that defies the ordinary? If so, welcome. Your mothership, Hot Alien Summer Camp, is calling you home. Are you ready to answer that call? To step into a space where your unique beliefs aren't just accepted but celebrated? Imagine a place where the extraordinary is the norm and the mysteries of the cosmos are the evening's main topic of discussion. A retreat where every workshop, every activity, and every shared meal is an opportunity to explore what lies beyond our conventional 3D experience. Did you find yourself nodding along just then? Feeling that spark of excitement at the thought of connecting with others who share your curiosity for the unknown? Then it's no coincidence you're hearing this right now. This is your invitation to join us, to become a part of a community that doesn't just ask the big questions, but revels in them. And what's a gathering of aliens without a little interstellar entertainment? Prepare to laugh with beings who understand your humor, as we bring you live comedy from cosmic minds of Ryan Singer and paranormal Karen Rontowski. Their insights and wit are as boundless as the universe, promising an experience that's as enlightening as it is hilarious. So, if you're ready to leave behind the world of round holes for a place where every square peg finds its place, a Hot Alien Summer Camp awaits. From August 8th through 11th in Lebanon, Tennessee, we're not just creating a retreat. We're forming a constellation of like-minded souls, each shining their unique light. Are you one of us? Are you ready to explore the depths of your alien soul among friends who understand that it's time to beat 'em up to Hot Alien Summer Camp? Your space in the cosmos is reserved. All you need to do is claim it. Visit hotaliensummercamp.com. Pre-sale tickets are on sale now. Let's embark on this cosmic journey together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Panda Pod. I'm your host, Rab, and I am joined by my usual pals, Jeff.
Hello.
And Wiggy. Yeah, and Wiggy's definitely here to join us for another great World War I episode. Well, going into kind of World War II at this point. We're going to do a continuation of that series. I think last time we kind of wrapped up with World War I. So we're going to try to kind of put a cap on it to go into like a kind of summary, as well as try to figure out if you guys have some questions, and then maybe dive into World War II and try to figure out what areas of that we should focus on as we move forward.
All the things.
So anyways, yeah, let's go straight into it. So I wanted to cover one thing that I saw that I felt like a lot of countries going into World War I had in common. And I know I covered this when I kind of covered them individually. But I feel like England, France, Germany, and Russia all had like strong socialist parties, either like directly in power in the case of Germany, or really close to power in the case of England, France, and Russia. So, like the reason I think this is important and is worth focusing on is like, what does it tell us about the causes of World War I and World War II and why they were fought? I know I had mentioned in the past, like, almost like, I think I had specifically said I didn't think there was like a conspiracy of like royal people getting together and like making the workers fight each other, but it was like almost too perfect that like right as all of these kind of like socialist governments are coming into being, that the like royal people managed to turn them against each other. I mean, that is quite convenient that it happened that way. And I have kind of an explanation that I feel like is not a direct conspiracy of, you know, them collaborating in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So kind of my idea is that like each of like none of those socialist parties had actually gotten anywhere close to, like, for instance, abolishing money or anything like that. Like the main thing, even the ones that were in like the ones that were in power in Germany, the main thing that they were trying to do with their power is ease the pain of workers and get like material benefits for the workers in that country. My idea is that like that is not necessarily at odds with the idea that you can exploit overseas people. So like you can have a socialist government and get, you know, lots of material benefits from your workers if you can infinitely exploit, you know, workers in other countries, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So kind of my thought is that it was easy. Like all of those governments, even the ones where the Socialist Party was most powerful, still had like really powerful aristocrats and capitalists. And I feel like it's easy for them to see, even without like direct conspiracy. And maybe there was a little bit of direct conspiracy, but it's easy for them to kind of like see the fact that those two things are not in contradiction and kind of direct the energy of socialism in a way outwards to exploit the third world through colonies. Because, I mean, another thing that England, France, and Germany all had in common, especially England and France, is that they had a lot of, you know, overseas colonies, and they were getting huge benefits, you know, domestically from that. So I think that World War I occurred, and I think this is important to World War II, kind of when the limit was reached on that. So, you know, England and France both had really strong overseas colonial holdings that were like generating a lot of income and stuff, and therefore able to fund fund things like relaxation of very harsh factory conditions and stuff. You know, I mean, by basically taking that labor and or that labor exploitation and moving it overseas, like that worked in England and France because they had those extensive colonial holdings. Germany and Russia didn't, and ultimately Russia was not really in a position to do anything about it because they were like kind of a backwater. But Germany was sort of in a position to do something about it. One of the main reasons I feel like World War I was fought was to kind of resolve that question, for Germany to kind of get a seat at the table of the colonial expansion game.
If I was a colonial, I'd want to see at that expansion game.
And maybe I'm saying something completely non-controversial. I mean, you guys aren't responding at all.
No, I think it's you're speaking the facts, right? Like I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, when you can separate the pain from the people in your country, right? Like then everything will just work better. I think the entire system works better. Do I think it's right? No. But I mean, I definitely see that as a strategy to make your people happier while still being able to take advantage of a main source of worker bodies by outsourcing or taking advantage of a smaller population somewhere else.
Right. So yeah, like that's kind of my theory about about the causes of World War One, and I think it becomes really important when you start looking into the causes of World War Two as well. So one thing I think it is worth kind of like covering in this line of reasoning is the United States, which, notoriously that's a big player that was absent from my list. They did not have a strong socialist party. And in fact, they really did not have one at all pre-World War One. Maybe a little bit, but I mean, truly nothing compared to those European countries. I mean, and really, there's never been in the U.S. something quite comparable to the European countries. I mean, there's been a big labor movement, but not strong socialist parties that held power in government. So the difference, I think, in the U.S. is that, like, ever since the Civil War, and even before the Civil War, the U.S. basically, like, eased most social tensions through the promise of, quote unquote, free land, right? So, like, they had essentially an infinite supply of land as long as they could continue taking it from the people who lived there originally.
But they did not have like that external land to exploit, I guess. Like, they didn't have any like other country, like the U.S. was not holding any other countries. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they weren't directly colonizing other countries for sure. I mean, well, okay, that's not totally true. There was, in between the Civil War and the and World War One, there was the Spanish-American War where U.S. literally gained the Philippines as colonies. So it's not true to say that they weren't colonizing at all.
Yeah,
but I think that it's a different situation when you're essentially you're buying off people a different way, right? You're not buying them off by making conditions better by easing, factory life by moving the factory somewhere else and exploiting those people instead. You're literally, doing land grants and stuff, right? Like,
right, yeah.
To settle the West and what have you. And like anybody who felt like they weren't getting enough, essentially, I mean, most of them at least could be bought off in that way, right? By being promised something somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's also the fight over the Caribbean, right? Like, back when and the other reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm really big into piracy at the moment, like actual legit pirates. Oh, and so like there was giant fights over who could control parts of the Caribbean, and all of the world powers were a part of that because they wanted the expansion, they wanted the resources, they wanted stuff like that, and America was definitely a part of that as well.
Well,
although at that time they were kind of still controlled by Britain, but still, like.
Well, and you mentioned that in particular is interesting because the Caribbean was like a huge source of sugar, and that's one way that material, like, lives of workers in Europe were improved without like directly putting them into power, right? Because if you feel like your life's getting better because you have access to, more sweet treats and what have you than you did 10 years ago, that's still a material benefit, but it doesn't actually put you any closer to threatening a monarch or what have you.
Yeah. I mean, in chocolates, and like specifically, like, there's a reason why we give, like during World War II and things like that, why we gave soldiers chocolate bars, right? Like, it's a booster, right? It's a mood booster.
Right.
So yeah, like giving things with sugar, letting them bake sweet pies and all that kinds of stuff. Like, yeah, I can definitely see that.
So, another thing the U.S. had to kind of ease tension between, besides just the promise of free land, is that they also had a permanent underclass. in the form of the former slaves. And that's why I specifically mentioned like ever since the Civil War, because I think that the Civil War was a huge restructure of American society. But you know, they still had mechanisms in place, especially in the South, to heavily exploit Black people in order to allow, you know, white workers to benefit and not, you know, they wouldn't necessarily be able to organize properly, especially if the unions were like, if they were able to exploit racial tensions against the unions and what have you, right? Then the white workers would not want to organize with the Black workers, and that was a thing that I think not. I mean, I guess it didn't really solve tensions between the upper class and the lower class, but like if you redirect those tensions, that's like a way to, you know, quote unquote, solve the problem for the upper class.
You might have actually stumbled across something super important when it comes to like the origin of racial tension. Like, because if you think about it, it wasn't the, I mean, it was the rich whites who were very much like holding their thumb over the African American population, right? And if you can play the poor against African Americans from saying that, like, okay, like this is like we have a slave labor, why would we pay you to do work, right? Like that could definitely breed resentment, especially if the resentment goes the way that they want it to, like you're saying, right?
Yeah.
That could definitely play a gigantic part in the hereditary, and I speak of hereditary as in a motion of, I don't think racism is hereditary, but as far as like social,
well, certainly inherited, but it's a social, not a genetic one.
Right. It's a social. It's a social hereditary thing, right?
Right.
So I think you really stumbled across something there. I think that's definitely interesting. I never thought about that before.
Well, I mean, that's the same thing that conservatives do with like people at the border now, right?
Sure.
Like make it seem like, oh, they're coming and they're taking your jobs, you should hate them, you know, instead of, you know, hey,
we moved your jobs overseas.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, but that's not just conservatives. I mean, Clinton's the one that signed the law into place that really like jump that, you know. So that's just the greater machine. I don't think that's, you know, specific to any political party, but yeah, like, yeah, for sure.
Well, this is kind of getting off topic, but like if you zoom out and look at the greater machine, I mean, in a way, it does kind of evolve its own components. And I think that one of the reasons that, you know, racism is so important to the machine is that it's like a literal way, it's like an easy way of telling two people apart. Like you need to have a mechanism that's an easy way of telling two people apart because you need to have that that sorting, right? So like it require like the machine requires that people be sorted in a certain way, and it's just convenient if literally like just by glancing at two people you can tell the difference between them. You know, I think that's part of the reason racism has stuck around so long.
Well, there's also the whole distraction element, right? Like if people are focusing on race wars, they're not focusing on what the bad things that people at the top are doing, right?
Right. That too.
So
yeah, so it kind of goes back on topic. I mean, there's specific instances of those racial tensions being exploited even in the time period in question. Like breaking strikes from workers in, like Detroit and places like that. White workers, they would go on strike, and then the capitalists would bring in a group of black workers with the kind of the promise that they were going to go to a better job, to a place that's less racist, and not telling them they were going there to break a strike. And so that, I mean, it's in some ways it's rational to hate someone who's breaking your strike, but they were able to exploit that to make them to effectively like alienate those two groups of workers against each other.
And like we can see that repeated again, like in very recent history with like the people busing huge amounts of, not huge, but busloads of migrants to random, cities in the States and dropping them off. I mean, it's the same goal, right? Make them hate them, because they're there and trying to steal your jobs or whatever.
Stresses the local economies of the or budgets, I should say, of the local cities and governments of those places. So you create an environment where, like New York, for example, you create an environment where they announce themselves as like a sanctuary city, right? They're like, we'll take all newcomers. We're the place. We've always done this, so we'll take them, right? And then the Texas governor said, okay, and then just kept busing and flying people to New York, and it strained their economy out. Now they don't have the budget to support that many people. And once again, there's a rift between the poor and the people who are getting bussed in, because now it comes up with those same questions that we've heard a million times. Like, well, what about the homeless? What about the veterans? What about, why aren't you taking care of all this, but you'll give, other people free housing and a cell phone and, $5,000 a month or how much ever that they're giving people. So again, it's causing the necessary effect, because it's separating the worker class from being able to worry about what the people at the top are doing, and it's stressing the economy, and it's making that governor look bad. So there's a lot of political reasons why they're doing it. I don't know if those are after effects or if that was the intention in the first place, but yes, that is definitely happening.
As far as the intention goes, and to kind of like loop it back, like the reason I even brought that up is, we're talking about this to try and like in some ways get a view of what's going on right now. And, you bringing all that up and seeing the parallels to what's happening here and now, just, it makes me think, okay, like, is the U.S. setting itself up for this kind of thing to play out as well? You know what I mean?
Well, that is the perfect segue, because the next thing I wanted to talk about on the historical front is the Nazis and what they were trying to do. You guys want to get into it?
Yeah, let's hear it.
5,000%.
The first thing I want to mention is, like, why is it important at all? What the Nazis were trying to do? And I think the reason it's an important question is because, like, you can look at the Nazis and say the outcomes were horrific, and that's true. But if you don't know what they were trying to accomplish, then it's kind of difficult to know how to prevent those same outcomes from occurring, right? I mean, because for all I know, if you don't know what they're trying to accomplish, for all you know, you could have the same goals as them.
Yeah, it was it's really tricky in the beginning, because you can see, so when we're speaking of World War II specifically, and I think we've said this before, but one of the reasons that they used to gain power, and one of the things that they talked to, and even in like some of the speeches that Hitler gave and things like that, one of the biggest things that they kept talking about was how, the people who were in power here before, the aristocrats that were in power here before, is the reason why we lost the war. And they're also the reason as to why our economy's in the shit now. It was a people's movement, right? That's how they framed it, in a way that would place the blame on the rich in the country. Right. Most other countries were able, I mean, outside of Russia, were able to kind of thwart that push. But because they lost the war, because the reparations from the war were so heavy, it really pushed them to, and it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a gradual thing. It took a lot of time. It took years.
I mean, not that
gradual
much time,
change,
though, really, right? Like,
I mean, it took quite a bit of time for Hitler's rise to power. Like, it was stages. There were stages in it. There were multiple election cycles that happened. It wasn't just like over the course of like a year. It took time. But the populist movement there grew substantially. But the reasoning, which is to Rap's point, is that the reason why they started to do this stuff was because, or at least the excuse that the Nazi Party used, was the people are in a terrible position because of the aristocrats. That's why our economy's in the shitter. That's why, all these people died, why we failed, why, all these soldiers died for nothing, like every story that they could throw at it is what they used.
So are you telling me that the Nazis came at the German people with a drain the swamp kind of attitude?
Yes, 1,000%.
And I think it's true. I mean, they do have they did have large popular support in terms of at least able to mobilize people into the streets. Like, I mean, they had to be able to get local brown shirts to participate in their raids. So it wasn't just like a totally top down movement. And by the way, as far as times were concerned, you asked Jeff how long that it took. Hitler went to jail in sometime around September 1921. So it did take some time between that and like the start of World War II. But if you're just talking about him coming to actual power, like the final time, he only became a Führer in 1934. So it's kind of like both is true. It was a short amount of time and a long amount of time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, they had election cycles, and what would happen is this. Rab mentioned to the point of like brown shirts, which is essentially the Nazi Party, right? They had people, and they would essentially rig the voting system. They go out and pressure people to vote. They would beat up people who were trying to vote for other people. They would harass and threaten the people who wanted to run against Hitler. Like, that was the thing. Eventually, that led to the Nazi Party becoming a majority party. And then that became Hitler becoming chancellor. And then that became to, I don't remember what his final title was.
Führer.
Führer, right?
He became chancellor in 1933 and became Führer in 1934.
Right. So it was like I mean, it did speed up, definitely, but it took time. Like, it wasn't, like I said, it just wasn't just 1 year. But yes, it did speed up towards the end drastically, because they would just murder people at that point, get away with it.
I guess, like, in my mind, like, yeah, like, I want to believe that it takes like generations for a culture or a people to like collapse to the level that, I guess collapse might not be the right word, but like morally collapse to the level of like Nazism. But I don't know why that surprises me. Like, I feel like I can look in, you know, the last like 10 years of my life and see part of our country doing the same thing. So I don't know why
Yeah,
it shouldn't be that shocking to me.
I think the reason is because there's a part of this that most people don't know, and that is that party was a very popular party because they did socialist things and they did them well. They didn't know. I don't think the majority of the people knew what the end goals were. To Rab's further point, they were focusing on the good things that were being done, which was infrastructure was a huge part of it. It was big roads that could hold tanks that they didn't might not have known that tanks were going to be on, right? It was electrical networks. It was the economy grew because they started focusing on their engineering work, right? Like that's where the whole like German engineering uh uh like specialty comes from, where you think, oh, it's German made, like it's going to be good mechanically, right? Like that's where all that stuff started. Um, and so the common person just thinks, man, they're doing a really good job at cleaning up the cities and building roads and putting in electricity and making sure that our lives are comfortable and everything else. It wasn't until they were done with the majority of that the like anti-Semitism and the lessers type of uh, communications were put into play. So, but when the party's done everything for you and you're not an other, like like it becomes easier for somebody to justify, right? Like, well, my life's getting easier and I don't know any Jews, right? Like I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying that that's where you start to get the okay, I'm behind this mentality as quickly as you do, because they did a lot of good work for the German people very quickly. And so there was a that's where you start to get some of the populist stuff, right? Like, man, like Hitler's a great guy, and then oh no, he's not a great guy, and everybody's under house arrest, right? Like, um, but yeah, that's just me going on a tangent. But
I think it's important, and I also think it is important to say that I mean, the anti-Semitism at least was front and center, or at least I guess you maybe front and center might be too strong, but it was certainly there. And what the main place I think that it started, or not started, it has very, very deep historical roots, to Jeff's point, right? I mean, it does to make Hitler did not make people anti-Semitic in Europe, right? That they were already that way, and he took advantage of that. But also, it was the anti-Semitism was there the whole time, and at least in the form of the stab in the back myth, right, about losing World War I. Because effectively they were stabbed in the back. I mean, Wiggy had said we're aristocrats, but it was also, I mean, that they explicitly blamed Jews.
Yeah, it was like they meant the same thing with both words. I don't know what the term for that is, but they were like synonyms essentially. Sure. Yeah, that's what I meant by it.
Makes sense. But yeah, so I guess I think this was a very interesting conversation about like how they came to power. And we might dig more into it. But I think where I was going with what they were trying to do is like more along the lines of what were the leaders trying to do? How were they trying to resolve those social questions that we brought up earlier in the for the other countries, right? Because I mean, we talked about Germany before World War I. Obviously, Germany post World War I is a completely different place, with different ideas about what can and can't be accomplished. They now kind of understand that they can't just, they at least can't compete with Britain and France on the same footing, right?
Right.
Yeah,
So-
especially economically.
Right. And so what they were trying to do, I mean, economically, obviously, they did focus on infrastructure, but I would posit that what they were trying to do was they were trying to take the U.S. model for easing social tension and apply it to Europe. And the reason I say that is because I think that they had the two elements, the two main elements that I mentioned earlier that the U.S. was using for that. And one of those elements is the free real estate, right? The, I mean, quote unquote free, but they effectively wanted to turn the Eastern Front into like the Wild West, where the Germans would be racially in charge and taking land from Slavic people who lived there. And they also wanted to turn the European Jews into a permanent underclass in a similar way that that the U.S. had African Americans as a permanent underclass.
Yep. Gotcha.
So I kind of see extreme parallels there. And I think they kind of thought, well, if we can't compete, like the people who were really, the very powerful in Germany, even beyond the Nazis, right? Like the extremely powerful capitalists who backed them in the beginning and what have you. I think they kind of saw that they couldn't compete with Britain and France if they acted like Britain and France. And they said, well, I mean, and they correctly identified the situation that the U.S. was eventually going to replace Britain and France. I think that some people alive in the 20s, 30s, and 40s could see that, right? They thought that it would make sense if they tried that model in Europe on Europeans and effectively, displace some of them for free land and also turn some of them into like a racial undercast for, cheap labor and what have you.
They definitely did that.
So I mean, I think what ended up happening, I think the story of World War II is a story of almost like, I mean, British and French kind of like revulsion at the idea that what they were doing to people in Africa could be done to people in Europe. I think that was one major driving factor of like ideology at play.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'd say is aside to that, and I believe this is something that we talked about before, was just like we're talking about how like historically the Jews were treated, right? They were either considered like as a great opportunity because they were very good at specific skills and they were useful to an economy until they weren't, right? And then they were treated as outcasts and treated very poorly and kicked out of countries and all those kinds of stuff. And so historically, when you think about it, like it was just going to happen again. Like it's the story. It's one of the stories of the Jewish people and how they've been treated. And so I'd put a little pushback on that one, but I think they did use an already perceived underclass within the region, right? And that's what they targeted. That's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm just curious what was. I mean, I don't disagree with what you just said, so I'm wondering what you were pushing back against.
Yeah, I didn't hear much of a pushback either. It really just sounded like you reiterated what he said.
Maybe I did. I just thought it was different in my head, right?
Okay.
Like maybe I was just misinterpreting it in my head, and it came out to be the same thing. That could just be maybe I just wanted to hear myself talk, guys. Maybe that's just what it was. Maybe I just need to have my
we gotta make sure everyone's thoughts are expanded here, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of examples we can go into, and I may want to focus on some of these in particular, but I mean, specifically what Britain was doing in India between World War One and World War Two was pretty extreme as far as like exploitation is concerned. I mean, they effectively intentionally caused famine there and killed millions of people. So, and I'm not trying to, obviously, I'm not trying to do like moral equivalism and like try to make the Nazis out to be like not that bad or anything. What I'm trying to say is I think that like from England's perspective, like at least the top of the top, it was kind of like icky. We did that to brown people, but you're doing it to white people?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Man, white people are the worst.
Yeah.
We're so bad.
You know, we are really bad. Yeah, we're just so bad. I have other thoughts on that topic, but we are very bad. We are very,
Right there.
yeah, yeah.
I feel like when we leave it at that, it's almost like we're saying like we're so bad, you know, like almost in a playful way.
No, it's not playful. We're just
No.
awful. It's like
Yeah,
it's more of like a what else can we say about it kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the examples are plentiful, and if you're not with me on this, you're probably intentionally misleading yourself to some degree. I don't know. I mean, you've had your brain scrambled by effectively the top of the top doing what they did all along and trying to play people's racial tensions against each other.
Right. Yeah.
I mean it's happened since. I mean, what was the big one? Like, what was the big takeover? Like, did it start at Alexander the Great? Was that when it started?
I mean, I would say that the modern white supremacy probably has its roots in the transatlantic slave trade. Like, I think you could probably say that that's where it started, even though you can obviously transatlantic slave trade had causes too. It's not like it's a standalone event where white people just got up and decided to be evil. But I would say that's probably where you can trace modern,
Yeah.
I guess, racism and colonialism from. Even like, I mean, but before that there was colonialism certainly, but not anything that looks even remotely modern.
I mean, Rome.
Right. Rome certainly colonized people and had slaves. I just don't think that was a racial system. I don't think that the ones in charge were, more white than others in general.
Actually, to your point, I think I would go ahead and say that I think Rome was more akin to Nazis than not. Just because they enslaved everybody. They just, especially other white people. Like, they just took over and made everybody slaves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to compare Rome to Nazis. I mean, apart from the fact that, I mean, literally, the people like who were living through the Nazis and Italian Empire in the World War II times did compare themselves to Rome to some degree. I mean, there were intentional comparisons to Rome. The Nazi salute came from the Roman salute, and obviously Mussolini wanted to basically claim that he had revived the Roman Empire.
That's something that we should talk on in an episode. Speak on the parts of this that don't get a lot of attention, and one of those is Mussolini.
Yeah, that would actually be a really good one. We should do a Mussolini app because it's less like Hitler gets all the focus in a way, and I think it's worth talking about comparing and contrasting those two. Because I think we would probably draw out even more modern parallels, right? Because if you are able to tell the difference between Mussolini and Hitler, then you would know which modern politicians they are each most like, and I don't know the answer to that question. It would be an interesting one to interrogate.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I think that'd be fun.
Well, I don't know anything about Mussolini, but I'm there to listen and learn.
Well, yeah, you're just here to learn, right? Like this is teach Jeff history.
Yep. And I actually think that might be a good place to kind of go into just like, where do we feel like we have questions? Because I kind of try to tell a story here of World War I and World War II as almost like a big polity, that included Germany, France, England, and the U.S. Obviously there was no central government of those places, but I think that World War I and World War II is kind of the story of them getting tied more and more together, and kind of agreeing on one system for how to best exploit the rest of the world and hide it.
Oh, well,
that system being...
Well, I mean, being like U.S. modern capitalism, because that's the one that worked.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, effectively, right, England and France had a kind of almost antiquated system. It was able to beat the Nazis, but, I mean, at the end of World War I, it was clear that system wasn't going to last. To people who were really paying attention, right? The antiquated system was kind of like that you would literally invade other sovereign nations and like have your people in their capital at all times, or you have your people in their capital and build, the concentration camp once again was invented by the British prior to World War II. Do that kind of resource, like direct resource exploitation, and literally like claim things such as the sun never sets on the British Empire, say that kind of stuff out loud. I think those were all like sort of relics in a way. And World War II is World War II is kind of like the final point of like, okay, it's the US system that's going to dominate the globe, and you either get on board or you get rolled over.
Yeah, I'd like to, when we're done with this, maybe we can, maybe after, in the new season, we can talk about how it's pushed to the more, how this really led to the modern day fiascos we find ourselves in with the history on that, right?
Yeah. Taking the history further, that's definitely a place we could go. And I guess I started that tirade by asking, like, where else do we think we need to drill in besides just taking it forward? Because I mean, I have no interest personally in like trying to go through like individual battles or anything like that. I mean, I'm guessing anybody who's listened to these World War I history would know that that's not of interest. I want to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about, we can just do what we've done before. We can break it down, right? So we can talk about Mussolini in Italy. We can talk about Japan.
Oh, yeah, that'd be interesting for sure.
We can talk about Japan. We can also talk about, there's so much. I think I can probably make a list out. But just as an example, like I think we can focus on the individual countries.
Right.
Their impact and their place in the story, and then kind of move on. We can talk about kind of the other thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is all the stuff that happened in Africa. Right. Like none of that gets talked about. That's mostly Italy, right? So there's all that stuff that happened in Italy or in North Africa. It truly was a world war.
Right.
And I think even in more of a sense than World War I was, in my opinion. But like, yeah, there's a lot of things for us to cover. I think we've got some places to go here.
Another one I I'd like to do is India. I think that would be interesting because they obviously sent soldiers to fight on the British side, but there was also really interesting stuff happening. Like I mentioned, I kind of brushed over it earlier, but like the famine and what have you that we can go into that's not widely talked about. And I think we could probably take that episode up to Indian independence, and it would make a lot of sense because that was pretty soon after World War II.
There is a specific battle I would want to talk about if we talk about India. There was a crazy battle that is actually interesting versus all of the other battles.
Yeah, I know nothing about this, so that sounds great.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. But yeah, I think we're good there. I think we've definitely got some stuff to go towards.
Yeah. China would be good too. We kind of brushed over Japan and China in World War One, so it'd be nice to actually do a well-researched episode on like the same as kind of India, like World War One and World War Two. China, I think, would be a pretty interesting period to cover.
Yeah, because and the China one and the Japan one are kind of intermingled,
sure,
in a way.
Sure.
And so that could be fun. Well, what happened wasn't fun. I'll say that.
Sure.
But us talking about it and learning from it and getting that out there is definitely fun.
Right. Yes. I guess with this episode, I did not do a lot of research in the sense that I feel like I already knew the things that I wanted to cover. And I mean, the points that I made in this episode are mostly, in my mind, backed up by the episodes we did before. But doing episodes on China, Japan, and India, I would certainly learn a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it explains a lot of Asian history in general. Just to go through some of that stuff, and it explains some of the things that are happening now, right? So when we move into the future, we have that context to go into.
I don't know if these two topics are related at all, but I'm really curious about the history between Japan and Korea because I don't really know a whole lot about it. And
Yeah,
I don't know if that has anything to do with World War II or not.
It does.
It does. Yeah. It's all like when I mentioned like Asian history, like in particular, like, yeah, there's a lot that goes on there that we can definitely talk about. Then we can point that one out for sure.
The Japanese did major war crimes against both China and Korea in World War II, and their government still like hasn't fully recognized that all that stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think Vietnam was one of them too. Unless that was China. I can't remember which one.
Vietnam was mostly the French, but it's possible Japan was there doing stuff. I think Japan did control it briefly, like, because France was on the opposite side of the war, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, there was, like, Laos, right? They were part of that, I believe, too. We'll have to check the timelines, but yeah, like there's so much history there.
Yeah, and like to kind of zoom out in a way, like that really set the stage for the modern history of the world as like a unit, right? Because I mean, it hasn't been that long since 1945. Definitely not that long when you start talking about like the time scales of ancient empires and the way
yeah,
used to change.
I mean, it's less than 100 years, you know?
Right.
Yeah, things have changed wildly.
Yeah, I mean, things have changed wildly since then, but they've also, I would say, they that event changed things wildly too.
Yeah, it does feel like we're definitely like living in the continued story of that.
Yeah, we definitely are. We all feel that. Just the other day, I was like, so what does it look like? The subject came on a different podcast I was listening to, and I thought to myself, so what happens when we do go to the next world war, right? And what that would look like on an individual level, like here in the U.S., right? I think the topic of discussion was that younger generations are soft. I think that was one of the points that one of the people were making. Um, and so when we start thinking about World War III, whether or not we have, I don't agree or disagree with that opinion, by the way, but um, it was just interesting to me as to what that looks like from American perspective now that we have new generations in the fold, right? Um, because the people who fought in World War II grew up listening to their parents and grandparents talking about World War One.
Sure.
And so now, we have another generation of, yes, like we're kind of in the same place, but it's also been an extra generation or two.
Right. Yes, for sure.
So it's a little bit of a different impact. I mean, we all learn about World War II and World War One to a degree, but like, what does that really feel like? It's not like, grandpa went to war, so I got to go to war. There were other wars, sure, but
Right.
not in the same scale, not in the same respect to motivations um, that we do some of these other wars for, right?
You even see that trailing off during like Vietnam, and
Yeah,
Korea too, with people like dodging the draft and that's a change that has been happening since that generation.
yeah. So like I was just saying, like I think it'd be interesting just on an individual level or a localized level, right? Like, what does that look like for an American household uh, to have to participate in war again? And we're assuming that this is like non-nuclear,
Sure.
right? Or at least localized uh, atomic, right? Like maybe some smaller big bumps go off, but I know that's an oxymoron, but there are
Well,
smaller big bumps.
yeah, I mean, on that point, I would say that like that's like the second that a big enough bomb goes off, effectively every government on Earth is useless, just in the sense of like they're suddenly useless to the people that are there surviving and trying to make the best time that they can in the world in a way. So like, and I think that the way that we've managed to avoid nuclear war so far is that like each government can see that and they recognize that fact and therefore they don't set off nukes at all.
Yeah, I mean it's yeah, you're completely right. I think you're completely right on that point.
Not to say that we'd be in a better world if somebody decided to nuke somebody else. I think we would probably be in a much worse world. But I think that everybody kind of sees that, and even from a self-centered point of view, they're able to kind of not pull the trigger. But yeah, on the subject of world wars in general, I actually think, and it might be worth spending an episode on this, or probably more. I think that World War III, like I think an objective history of the world will call the Cold War World War III, and if there's wars beyond that, they might call it World War IV, which might get confusing because if we have an actual World War III, or like if we have one that like the U.S. government calls World War III, like that could get a little confusing, I suppose. But I do think that like if you took an objective history of the world, the Cold War would be called World War III.
Sure.
I see. I mean, it depends on how you look at the Cold War, right? Personally, I think it's just a war of technology, right? Like that's how I view it. Who could get the person into space? Who could get the person on the moon? Supposedly,
Allegedly.
allegedly. Yeah, I don't want to go into that. I don't want to go into that right now. But like, it was a race to technology, um, and propaganda. right? Like, I feel like that's where the American marketing system was born.
Well, it was also an arms race, though.
Well, and there's a lot of literal fucking killing too. Like if you study like Indonesia, like there were over 1 million people killed in Indonesia, and effectively what was like a a a campaign to exterminate communists. And so like, and I mean that looked a lot like a war in the sense that I mean there was obviously the communists did not take lightly to being suddenly exterminated, especially that many of them. So, and I think that like if you consider Vietnam and Korea to be parts of the Cold War too, I mean, I really think that it does tell like it tells a similar story to World War II. I think that there's a lot of people who have kind of an incentive to not call that World War III, though, to kind of, especially at the time. They did not. They wanted to make it seem like there was peace when there was not, kind of.
Oh, maybe that's a gap in my history information then, because when I think of, I mean, maybe I got brainwashed a little bit too, right? Because the only thing that I think of when I think of Cold War is, like I said, the technology war between the U.S. and what eventually would be Russia, right?
Right.
The USSR, and then like that's how I interpret that, but that's all that I know. Sure. So maybe that's something we need to go over too. Let's just put a pin in Cold War after we talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it definitely, especially like early Cold War. I mean, that would go into threaded nicely in what you were talking about, like what happened after, right? But yeah, and I think if you do, like, if you take my story as a given, and I'm not saying you have to or you, the listener, have to, but if you do take kind of the story I'm trying to tell here as a given, that, you know, the story of World War I and World War II was like the U.S. system coming into power and eliminating competitors in like UK, France, Germany, and, you know, basically saying to the world, like, it's got to be this way, you're going to get crushed. I mean, or, you know, the Cold War or World War III, whatever you want to call it, is like the process of that being put into place, right? Like that being applied to the rest of the world and not just the, you know, the people on top.
Right, because the Cold War was the war on just socialism and communism all around, like everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
It's more than just the U.S.-Russia beef that I think comes to your mind.
Well, and also a lot of it was direct U.S.-Russia beef, because I mean, if you think about where Korea and Vietnam are, they border, they both border. I mean, I don't think Vietnam borders Russia, but Korea borders both, and Vietnam borders China, who was a major player in the Cold War. So, you know, I think that that it's not a coincidence that that's the case, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I got wool pulled over my eyes, or maybe I just never dug that deep into it. That could be too.
Well, so that's our goal here is thoughts expanded, right?
That's right.
And my thoughts.
Well, expanding on what Wiki was talking about earlier about what's going to be like the next, you know, trigger to the World War, like the next World War. Do you think then, like, is the story you're telling, Rab, the story of the next, you know, big war being, you know, the American economic system, you know, versus whatever comes to oppose it, whether it be China's system or whatever?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's kind of, I mean, I would say obviously time will tell, right?
Sure.
Not possible to predict the future, but
I want you to predict the future, please, right now.
Well, if I had to predict the future, I would say we may already be in World War IV, and that this time might be the beginning of it. Like if you took an accurate, you know, historical record, and I think that maybe you could say, if you continue that story out, right, if you say that the U.S. was victorious in World War III, and that the Soviet Union collapsed completely in 1991, right, and that, you know, that was the end, and they won. then they had a period of relative peace,
Right.
maybe 10 years. And then you have 9/11, and then you have some period of like kind of extreme insanity. And then you have potentially, we may be in World War IV already. We're not, I mean, if that conflict between Iran and Israel had gone off, like that might have been it.
Yeah, that really could start. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
where
fire up.
that's where my thought goes, is the moment that Iran got involved, right? Like that's such a pivotal pushing point in the history here of one group of allies being against another group of allies, and people not knowing, and some countries not knowing where they fit in the middle. And so I think and this just keeps stemming from all of the U.S. interference in the region, right? Like I feel like we were an accelerator, because we just kept creating more and more and more and more destabilization in the region, right? Like we like to pretend like we get everybody to the table and they work stuff out, and we have a diplomatic solution to things, but we never do when it comes to the Middle East.
Sure.
Like there's no reason, and I've said this a bajillion times, there's zero reason for us to be involved at all in the Middle East. We don't we don't have the history. We don't have the only reason why we get involved is because of oil, right?
Right.
Or some like hidden agenda from the leadership of the country. Like as a people, like the United States has no business or reason to be in the Middle East.
Sure.
We benefit more from trade partners than we do from destroying countries. And so yeah, like I feel like we've just been an accelerator because of greed, right? And I think it would have taken a lot longer for this thing to actually pop off the way it did. Have we not seen? Have we not just been like giving people arms?
Sure.
Like we just go for places and drop arms, or give arms to like countries and things like that, and so we're just accelerating the process of discontent and terrible things that are happening around the Middle East. So yeah, I feel like depending on what Iran does is going to determine as to whether or not this pops off. And it also depends on what China decides to do with in concerns with the group that them and Russia put together.
Sure.
Right. So I think, So I think it just depends on those two things. Those are the current fire starters.
Sure.
If we avoid it, fantastic. That's the hope. But we are being pressured. America is being pressured. And there's two ways to look at that. We can either give into the pressure and back off a little bit and let the rest of the world figure out their problems, or we can dig our heels in and force the exchange.
Right. Yep. And I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I think you've kind of brought us back to like, why is it worth talking about this stuff? And I do think that if you want to understand the history of the modern world, starting at World War II and going up to the present makes a lot of sense. So I think that was kind of our goal. And I think we've now got a strong enough foundation to kind of understand at least what was like when we start talking about World War II, or like specific countries in World War II, I guess is probably where we're going to go with that. We have a foundation to understand that now.
Every time you say something, like I've been on like work calls so much lately, like using like any of the popular technologies, and every time you say something that I agree with, I look for the thumbs up button. like
They
Like,
should just
so,
turn their camera on and give us an actual thumbs up every time.
right. So like I just keep looking for this thumbs up button. And it's definitely not there. I mean, it's no secret. Like we use Riverside for our recordings, which is like an online platform because we're not all in the same place. And so, like I'm saying, like every time he says something, I just want a thumbs up, and it's not there. So Riverside,
Yeah, add a
put in
thumbs
some
up.
social, put in some social emotes for interaction.
Wow, they won't even let me paste a thumbs up emoji into their chat. So they're just like absolutely prejudiced against this idea.
All right, Riverside, we need to get on it. Thumbs up button, some social buttons here.
Oh, there we go. I got it. I gave you a thumbs up.
There we go.
Oh, hey,
Well, I
that
think
took way too long to figure out.
Yep. I think that's a good place to leave it on lack of thumbs up. Lack of thumbs up to Hitler and what he was trying to do, guys. I mean,
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, thumbs down even, right? Not even lack of thumbs up.
Yeah,
Thumbs
Riverside not
down
giving me
to
a
Hitler.
thumb
That is the
down right
official
now.
end upon line.
Where's our crying face emoji? Like, ugh, gross.
But thanks for joining us, everybody, and don't forget to try to find our Discord. There's links on thepandapod.com. And don't forget, we have changed our name to Thoughts Expanded, and the website and all that stuff will be coming with the start of Season 3.
S3 boys. All right, later, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.